Hi, I'm Dr. Cindy, the expert's ghostwriter, and I help trailblazers and leaders write books that make money and an impact. I'm an author, creator of Crank Out Your Book in 8 Weeks, my signature book writing program where I teach you how to be your own ghostwriter, and I have bespoke ghostwriting and book editing services. And I welcome you all to the Dr. Cindy Show. This is where I'm interviewing industry leaders and giving my best tips and tricks on book writing, book marketing, author platforms, and so much more. And you are watching the week 3 edition of how it's going with cranking out my own book in 8 weeks. And today I am going to walk you through the Warpspeed Your Writing exercise that I do with my Crank Out Your Book in 8 Weeks clients in week 3. And I'll take you to the Google Drive folder that I've shared with my entire newsletter, where everybody's watching over my shoulder as I write my book, and you'll see what I actually accomplished and how it went in week 3. So it's kind of funny because it's an 8-week program, and in the first week, we are really doing a brainstorm for your target reader, and we create a detailed outline for your table of contents. And then in week 2, we create interview questions so that when you are sitting down to write your book starting in week 3, you're not starting from a blank page or even starting from a concept for a chapter and then some bullet points of what you want to cover. Instead, you've taken those bullet points and fleshed them out with self questions that you're going to be answering to write your draft, which I have to admit is pretty brilliant. So then we're in week 3, and I'm doing it for myself as well. And one thing that you might be wondering is, okay, Cindy, in your 8-week program, the first 2 weeks are really planning and pre-writing or pre-drafting. And then in the next 6 weeks, you're going to write the whole thing. So how on earth do you quantify that? How would you know how to pace yourself in order to get there? And there's an exercise I do with my students where I have everybody pull up a blank Word document. And I ask them to write a story about a time when they thought they were right and it turned out they were wrong, because we all have those moments and they make pretty good stories. And so I'll time everybody just for 5 minutes. And at the end of that 5 minutes, I have them turn on a word count and see how many words they wrote. And then we multiply whatever that number of words is by 6, and we get ideally what they could have done if they had been writing for a whole hour, just answering questions like that for things that already happened that they well know that they can easily speak to. And there we have at least some idea of what your average word count per hour might be. Now, we're getting a baseline. So what you want to do after that is, actually write a chapter and see how long that takes you. And I'll say for myself, I usually hit around 1,000 to 1,500 words an hour. I have done 3,000 before, but that is not common for me. And for my students, they usually hit upon averages somewhere between 600 and 1,200, which is totally in a very normal range. And what we do then for your average word count per hour, then we look at your target word count for the book. So for the length that you want the book to be, what is the word count that would get you that length? And then for that word count, then we divide that by the word count per hour to get the amount of hours that you would need in order to write your book over that 6-week period. And I usually will use the baseline of, if it's 1,000 words, then you would want, and let's say that you're aiming for just, maybe 130 page a book. Let's say you're a speaker and you just want something to be able to sell at the back of the room and that kind of thing. A 130 page book might be plenty to achieve those goals. And you can get there with 30,000 words, and that would come out to about 5,000 words a week for the duration of the 6 weeks. So that's just 5 hours a week as well, if you're averaging 1,000 words an hour. So you want to set your plan, and then you figure out what you are actually doing, and then maybe adjust it or adapt it a little. And then this is also about actually setting the time aside, because if you can make any kind of plan you want to, and then if you don't implement it and put in the time, then that's not going to work. So another thing we factor in is, in a given week, do you have 5 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours available? If not, what can you move around? And if still not, then how can we adjust our expectations for what you can reasonably accomplish this week? And then, if it ends up taking 10 or 12 weeks to write your book because, you didn't have the amount of time in the given 8-week period, that's okay too. We just want to have a plan and have a process and follow it consistently, and then keep doing that until your word count is achieved. All that said, let's take a look now at how I did in looking in the week 3 folder here. So this is the week 3 folder that I shared in my book project folder, which is available to everyone on my email list, and they've been looking over my shoulder as I've been doing this writing. And so I'm going to start with something that my Crank Out Your Book in 8 Weeks students totally hate, which is the word count tracker. But they end up loving it. But in the beginning, well, because it keeps us honest, that's not always fun. So here we go. In the first column, I have all the chapters listed with the number and then the topic. And my goal for this book was about 30,000 words. So for 11 chapters, I would need to get 2,800 words per chapter to achieve that. You can see here at the bottom, to achieve that 30,000, well, just over 30,000. And then I have a deadline. So based on the writing in weeks 2 through 8, I would need to basically do 2 chapters a week for most weeks in order to hit that deadline. And you can see here something funny happened. So I started writing, and I got the first chapter done. It was a little bit longer than what I was projecting. And then for the second chapter, it was also longer than I was projecting, and I didn't finish this until 7/11. So the goal was 7/7. That was the end of the first week of the drafting period, and I was 4 days late here. But the reason I was 4 days late was, if you look down here, this is 6,311. So if I was only hoping for 5,000 words in that first week, it took me a little longer to get there. And at the same time, it was a little bit bigger of a word count in order to finish those first 2 chapters. So I learned something interesting right away. And, it could be a lot of things going on. Sometimes there's just some fluff that will get edited out. So that could be why this word count is longer than anticipated. And at the same time, if they keep all being this long, then maybe my book will just be a little bit longer than I thought it might be. Another interesting thing that I want to point out here is for chapter 2, I also realized this should probably go later in the book. So once I realized that, I did keep writing it because I had the interview questions done, and I was like, I'm in the mindset, let's just do it now. But I realized that for the content and the topic, because once I started writing it, I realized just how sad it is, because growing up, I lost a lot of cats because they were strictly outside and just some other factors. And so that is part of my why and what motivates me so much to want to help as many cats as I can. But I realized for the target reader that wants to be a cat foster mom and would like some encouragement, or would like to make it feel a little bit more doable for them, this is not the second chapter for that book. This would need to come later. And I'm just going to come back here and also show you what it looked like in the drafting. So I have in bold the heading for the headings that correspond to the table of contents with the bullet points of what I wanted to cover in chapter 1. And then the self questions are in italics. And then I've got the answers to the questions. And you'll see that answer is pretty long. And then here, I just list all the things that were important. So this is like prompting myself for what I want to say, and then what objects do I remember, who is in the story. You know, so I've got some little questions about some important elements to help me tell a better story, like dialogue, what do I hear? And then I write the story. And you can see there I've used dialogue, and it's pretty concise. So another thing about this word count is some of it is drafting within the chapter, and that will definitely get deleted. And then here's another self question, and you know, this is, I wanted you to see this too, that some of these self questions, the answers are pretty short, and then for others they are a little bit more lengthy, and there's a short story, but everything's not a short story, and that's okay too. And that is what I wanted to show you for week 3 and warp speeding your writing. So for sure, this just cranking out your book and getting it on paper, you wouldn't take the file that I just shared with you. I wouldn't send that to a book formatter for formatting and being well on my way to publishing my book. Definitely not. This needs editing, and I'm very aware of that. And when you're cranking out your book and following my 8-week formula, what you're going to have is a rough draft that you can work with to get it to that refined point. And there's lots of things I encourage you to do in your draft, as I've done in mine, like keeping those bold headings as you move from one subject to another, because then you can keep up with yourself. And by the time you get to your finished book, you may realize you don't need those subheadings at all, and you can make it flow without them. And then you may realize they're really helpful, and you might, you know, make them a little punchier from a copywriting perspective, but use those to demarcate when you end one story within a chapter and start another, or when you move from one point to another point. That can be really helpful for you to see, and also even visually. If I have one subject heading that just has a little bit of information, and then another one that is enormous, that tells me, should that really long one be broken up? Should that really long one be its own chapter? For that really short one, does that go within another section instead of having its own section? Does it belong in the book at all? Is there more that I need to say? All kinds of things you can look at there. So I hope this has been helpful and insightful. And stay tuned for the next video. I'll be walking you through week 4 as I continue to follow the process of cranking out my book in 8 weeks. So stay tuned.